Have you ever picked up the Bible and just wondered, how is this thing actually put together? I mean, it's not just one long book, right? It's really more like a library, a collection of writings that, amazingly, tells one single unified story. So today, let's unpack the architecture of one of history's most influential texts.
Okay, so this sounds like the beginning of a pretty strange riddle, doesn't it? But stick with me, because the answer reveals the absolutely fascinating origin of the word Bible itself. And you might be surprised to learn that it all starts not in a holy place, but in the noisy, bustling world of ancient trade.
Our story kicks off right here, in a city called Byblos. It was a busy port on the Mediterranean coast. And it wasn't famous for religion. Nope, it was all about commerce. Specifically, it was the world's main hub for exporting a revolutionary new writing material. And here's how that journey unfolded. It all starts with the papyrus reed, an Egyptian plant. This stuff was shipped through the port of Byblos, and the city became so linked with it that the Greeks just started calling scrolls and books biblia after the city. That word then made its way into Latin, then Old French, and boom, it finally gave us the English word Bible. Pretty wild, right? From a plant to a port to the holy book. So the name itself tells this cool story of trade and technology. But what about the structure of the book itself? Well, to really get that, we need to decode another really important word.
You know, when we hear the word testament, our minds almost always jump to a last will. But in this context, that's not quite it. It actually comes from the Latin testamentum, and a much better translation is covenant. So instead of thinking about a will, think of it more like a solemn, binding agreement between two parties, in this case, God and humanity.
And reframing it that way, as a covenant, really helps us understand the Bible's main division. First, you have the Old Testament. This details that first covenant God made with Israel, which was built on law and promise. And then you have the New Testament, which describes the new covenant established through Jesus. This one is all about fulfillment and grace for absolutely everyone. They're distinct, for sure, but they are also deeply connected. So this brings us to the big question, right? Are we looking at two separate libraries of books, each telling its own story from its own time? Or is there a single, overarching narrative that connects them both? How do we make sense of this relationship?
Well, I think the best way to really get a handle on their unity is with a powerful analogy. Let's imagine the entire Bible as this grand, epic play, presented in two distinct but totally inseparable acts.
Okay, so Act 1 is the Old Testament. This is where the stage is set. We're introduced to the main characters, the central conflict of sin and separation gets established, and the entire plot is built around a core promise, the promise of a savior, of redemption. It's the whole setup, full of foreshadowing and building anticipation. Then the curtain rises on Act 2, the New Testament. This is where the story just rushes toward its climax. Jesus arrives on the scene, and we start to see how he is the fulfillment of all those promises, prophecies, and patterns that were laid out in Act 1. This is the resolution. It's the part where everything from the first act suddenly clicks into place and makes perfect sense.
So if it's really one play, there have to be some common threads, right? Things weaving the two acts together. What are the plot points and themes that prove this is one cohesive story?
There are actually a bunch of them. First, it's the same God, the same character, acting in both testaments. The mission is passed from one chosen people, Israel, to a new chosen people, the church. We see these incredible patterns where events in the Old Testament are almost like a blueprint for what happens in the New. And maybe most powerfully of all, there's the direct fulfillment of hundreds of specific prophecies. And this right here makes that connection so real, so concrete. I mean, take the prophet Isaiah. He wrote around 700 BC that a virgin would give birth. Fast forward centuries, and Matthew's gospel quotes that exact prophecy, applying it directly to the birth of Jesus. Or look at Psalm 22. It describes the suffering of someone being crucified, way before that was even a common form of execution. And it is a stunning match for the accounts of Jesus on the cross. It's incredible. And that, right there, is the key. This incredibly intricate web of prophecy, patterns, and promises is what transforms the Bible from just a collection of books into a single cohesive story. The two acts truly need each other to be fully understood. You can't have one without the other.
Maybe no one has ever summed up this relationship more perfectly than the early church theologian St. Augustine. He said this: "The new is in the old contained, the old is in the new explained." It just brilliantly shows how the potential for the New Testament is hidden all through the Old, and the Old Testament's full meaning is finally unlocked by the New. And so that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If the Old Testament isn't just a standalone story, but really the first act of a play that's building towards this grand finale, how does that change the way we read it from the very first page?